Hello everybody and happy Thursday. Welcome to our digital classroom and our first digital lecture. Now before you watch this video, you should have already read lines 1 to 272 of Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech on the Vietnam War. That's pages 151 to 158 in your ebook. You should have stopped right before the paragraph that starts with, "At this point I should." So you're stopping right here at the end of this first full paragraph. If you read ahead, that's totally fine. Just know that today we're only going to be talking about lines 1 to 272, and we'll be stopping and saving the rest for next week. So to help you better understand the reading, I wanted to take some time to go over a few things, and we're going to start at the beginning of the speech. So at the beginning of the year, when we looked at Reagan's address to the nation following the Challenger explosion, we talked about how a speaker has to consider their purpose in addressing an audience and how the specific audience they're speaking to impacts the choices the speaker makes. For example, in lines 1 to 13, we see King making some choices based on his audience and what he wants to accomplish in his speech. Reread those last two lines in that first paragraph. "Tonight, however, I wish not to speak with Hanoi and the National Liberation Front, but rather to my fellow Americans." This line tells us that King's focus in this speech isn't on telling the quote-unquote enemy what they should do, but rather he's focused on telling Americans what they need to do. And he doesn't just say Americans here, he says my fellow Americans, which makes him a part of the audience he's addressing. He's making a rhetorical choice here that Reagan also made in his speech, which was appeal to community. We're going to go ahead and move to the next page, page 152. In this speech, King is making an argument, and he's trying to persuade his audience to agree with him. Remember from the videos that you watched and the articles that you read that the Vietnam War was a real hot-button topic in the 60s, really highly debated. So King had a tough job here. Now, when you're looking at King's argument, or any argument, you need to look at whether the reasons the speaker gives for their position are logical. Logical reasons make sense intellectually and are based on fact rather than emotion, so logos rather than pathos. In this paragraph, King gives us his first of 7 reasons for taking a stand on Vietnam. He claims that the war is draining resources from the programs that help the poor in the United States. How do we know whether or not this argument is logical? King doesn't necessarily provide us with data and statistics to back up his claim, but is what he's saying reasonable? Does it make sense that it could be true? Would funding an expensive war likely necessitate cuts elsewhere in our country's budget? Yeah, so we can go ahead and chalk this first reason up as logical, whether you agree with it or not. Another way for the speaker to sway the opinion of their listeners is by carefully choosing words with the connotation they need to make their point. Connotation being an idea or a feeling a word invokes in addition to its literal meaning. For example, in line 35, King uses the word crippled. He says, "We were taking the black young men who had been crippled by our society and sending them 8,000 miles away to guarantee liberties in Southeast Asia, which they had not found in Southwest Georgia and East Harlem." He says crippled rather than saying black young men who had been hurt or black young men who had been held back. Why? Why does he choose the word crippled? Well, crippled has a much stronger connotation than words like hurt or held back. It suggests that society has deliberately inflicted irreparable harm upon these young men, which has resulted in their loss of potential and full social and economic health. The word crippled draws attention to the fact that young men who have been damaged by racial inequality are now being sent to Vietnam to fight for freedom they don't feel they have at home. On the next page, we see King include a counter-argument to the point he's trying to make. In lines 61 to 63, he explains that he is responding to those who would say that as a civil rights leader, he should not be involved in anti-war efforts. Convincing arguments often include counter-arguments, presenting and responding to opposing views on the issue. This builds the speaker's credibility because it shows that they've thought about the issue from both sides. They've already thought about what people might have to say against them. Here, King combats any naysayers by saying that as a civil rights leader, his concern is for all of America's people. He said, "We chose as our motto to save the soul of America." And then he says, "Now it should be incandescently clear that no one who has any concern for the integrity and life of America today can ignore the present war." because this war is affecting America's people, and because King has taken an oath to stand up for America's people, he has to speak out against this issue. Moving down this page, similar to word choice, speakers also carefully choose the details that they include in their speech. Details appeal to listeners and enlist their support for a position. Take a look at the detail King includes in lines 82 to 87. What detail is he offering to the listener? What do you think he would choose? Why would you think he would choose to include this? And what effect do you think it has on the listener and on their view of King as a speaker and as a person? Also pay close attention to how King structures his arguments in this speech. He clearly states a reason, and then he explains and defends the reason. What reason does he offer for opposing the war in lines 88 to 92? And what is his defense of that reason? Does his defense make his argument more effective or persuasive? Remember that you don't have to agree with him to think that his argument is effective. Just because he didn't win you over to his side doesn't mean that he wasn't being logical or reasonable. So look at his argument, and is he saying something that's reasonable in defense of his reason here? There's another way to structure an argument. We're going to skip down to page 154, lines 123 to 138. This other way to structure an argument is to use inductive reasoning, where you present evidence before you present the conclusion. So where King has previously only listed reasons and then evidence, here he lists evidence and then a reason. So in this section, he presents facts about Vietnam's struggle for independence and America's resistance to Vietnam's independence, which led up to King's conclusion that America's presence in Vietnam causes more problems than it solves. In this portion of the speech, King offers a lot of evidence, facts, examples, and other details to support his reasons and ultimate conclusion. Including details like this makes his argument stronger and makes his audience more likely to be persuaded to agree with him. Scrolling down to lines 166 through 170, we see some more impactful word choice here. Reread those lines and look for words that convey judgment. What are some of the words in these lines that convey judgment? And what is the connotation of each of those words? Why would King choose those particular words to make his point here? Just something that I want you to think about as you're answering your questions at the end of this reading. Another device authors and speakers use is parallelism. So we see a great example of that on page 156. I've highlighted all of the times here that King said, "we have." He keeps repeating this phrase, focusing the attention on all that the United States has done to the Vietnamese and showing that the United States is responsible for many events that have been detrimental to Vietnam. He says, we have destroyed, we have cooperated, we have supported, we have corrupted. So he's pointing out all of these different things, and that repetition really emphasizes the amount of things that we have done. And as you read this speech or any speech, you're going to be reading with your own prior knowledge and judgments in the back of your mind, which will lead you to make your own judgments about the arguments King is making here. Remember that an argument can be reasonable and logical even if you don't agree with it. What does King risk in lines 202 to 211 by making sympathetic comments about the Viet Cong? He does that here. Perhaps a more difficult but no less necessary task is to speak for those who have been designated as our enemies. Why might he be willing to take this risk of sympathizing with his audience? King uses this section of his speech to show his audience what things might look like from the Viet Cong's perspective. He's showing them what the United States' actions look like from outside the United States, something people in his audience might not have considered. On page 157, we see King address one more counter-argument before he moves on to his last reason for speaking out, which is on page 158. And that's where we're going to stop our reading. You should have stopped your reading right here at the end of this paragraph. So now that you're done with your reading, you'll want to go to page 166 and answer questions 1 through 4. Just 1 through 4. We'll finish and do questions 5 through 8 after we read the rest of the speech. So just focus on 1 through 4 for now. And you can answer those questions in the textbook by clicking on this little box with a Q in it. And make sure you have this checkbox down here that says Save to My Notebook. Make sure you check that off so that it saves your work so that I can view it and so that you can go back and look at your work later if you need to. And make sure that you're answering these questions thoroughly. Don't just give me a one-sentence answer. Don't try to get out of here as quickly as you can. Answer the questions thoroughly and make sure that you're citing evidence from the text. As you scroll through to each question, they're all going to say cite evidence from the text to support your answer. So all of your responses should have your own thought, but they should also have quotes from the speech that support your thoughts. And the last thing I want to mention before we go is that I want to make sure that you're taking advantage of all of the resources that this textbook, this e-textbook, has to offer. So if you go back to page 151, you'll notice that in certain places around the textbook, you have these buttons that say Close Read. And when you open those up, it gives you a little video, and these are really awesome because it has two people talking about one specific section of the book and really breaking it down line by line, talking about what it means and what's going on, like rhetorically, in this section of the speech. So those happen throughout the speech. So if you find that there's a piece that you're not understanding very well, or if you're just not understanding the speech very well as a whole, these would be really great things to help give you a little bit of insight. Even if you're understanding the speech, it's really great to hear readers discuss a piece of this text in depth. So I really recommend these videos. I think you'll find them really helpful. Another thing that you should pay attention to is when you have vocab words that are underlined, or you have these little footnotes that give you more information. So make sure that you're clicking on those, because if you don't know what the National Liberation Front is, clicking on that footnote and finding out that it was also known as the Viet Cong, revolutionary fighters in South Vietnam, is really going to give you more insight and more context, and it's going to make this speech make more sense as you're reading it. So make sure that you're using the resources that are available to you. This e-textbook has a lot of them, so take advantage of that. Don't just be confused. And as always with any of your assignments, please let me know if you have any questions as you're completing numbers 1 through 4 on page 166. I'll be online during my office hours, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can if you message me outside of those hours. Questions 1 through 4 are going to be due on Monday at 8:30 a.m. because that's when at 9 o'clock is when I'll be posting the next assignment. So make sure you have those done Monday by 8:30. And make sure you have those done so that we can dive right into the second half of King's speech on the Vietnam War. All right, have a great weekend, and I will see you guys online on Monday.